Greetings, folks. This is Scott, and you're tuning into A Woman's Place, the podcast where we break down all the policies and politics that affect the 51%. That's right, women are half the U.S. population, and Ashley and I are here to give you the facts about how today's events are affecting them. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Good morning, Ashley Brown.
Good morning, Scott Osborne. Good to see you.
Happy, what is today? Thursday. We're taping on a day we don't often tape on, but that's okay.
Yes. And excited to continue our conversation with the amazingly talented Elizabeth Spahn. Yes?
The ever-estimable Elizabeth Spahn. And this is part of our continuing series about misconceptions about where life begins. There's two earlier sessions. If you're just tuning into this one as the third, please go back and check those. We are doing this series of 3 so far on how we better understand conception, when life begins, because it feeds into so many current topics today. So we thought looking at some of the history, especially, and clarifying how we got here was be worthwhile. So that's how we're into session 3.
Well, and I think, and just before, we bring Elizabeth in, it's so important, and we talk about this, information moves so quickly and topics move so quickly, and public opinion and commentary is often taken as fact. And so it's I think it's been so valuable to take the time and talk through, like, how did we get here with some of these ideas and thoughts? So I think it's really worthwhile.
And this is an area where, as we've seen in our past 2 sections, one was on misconceptions in religion, especially Christianity, and one was on misconceptions in science. And Elizabeth, as she will say, is a researcher. She's a legal scholar, but she's an incredible researcher. So she has relied upon experts in those 2 fields of religion and science to get her information. But we've seen how misunderstandings have worked their way into everything, including medical textbooks, laws, statements by public officials, even statements by people in the field. It's really become very clouded. So that's why we're here. I do want to say, though, as a little bit of a disclaimer, I guess, we're not going to be covering all of the current state of where all of our laws are on something like abortion or conception. It's a very cluttered field at the moment. In different states, there's 41 states actually that have bans, but with all different types and all different gestation periods. We're not going to get into that. We'll do a show at some point. We really just want to look at how we came to understand things the way we do. And Elizabeth's specialty is that history. And I think that's a very important foundation. So just as a note, we will not be doing the current update of everything in 2025. We'll leave that for a future show.
Okay. Are we ready to
Well, let me
welcome
say a
Elizabeth?
little bit about Elizabeth, that for those who are just tuning in, she is a professor of law emerita at New England Law, where she taught U.S. constitutional law for 37 years. She's developed legal curriculum. Her specialty actually was anti-corruption and anti-bribery, which I think is fascinating. And she's written numerous articles on anti-corruption law. But she also has a specialty on some international areas, but especially on women's rights and reproductive history. So she published an article, which we will call famous and is linked in this show, about the misconceptions of how in science, religion, and law there are so many misconceptions. So we are now delighted to bring Elizabeth Spahn on. She is currently a resident in Manatee County, so she's now a local, and we love having her here with us. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I
Where's
know.
Where's Ashley? There she
Good,
is. Hi.
good morning. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
And thank you once again in advance for your words of wisdom.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a joy. I love your podcast. I really enjoyed listening to it.
Thank you. Spread the word. So
I do.
Just by Elizabeth, that I have warned all of our listeners, I shouldn't say warned, but I've alerted all of our listeners that we're really going to be looking at misconceptions in history. We're not doing a deep dive on where every state is around conception laws today. We'll do that in a future show, but we're really looking at how we kind of came to see things the way they are today, and especially picking up on your research on the history of these understandings. So just so you know, we've definitely covered that. And if I can just start us off, how did we get all these legal misconceptions? And what's some of the big stuff that is misunderstood today? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. We've got 20 something more or less states flailing around trying to define fetal personhood, some mythical moment of conception or fertilization, as we discussed in the science podcast. 30 to 50% of all fertilized eggs don't make it to a live birth. This
Just
is
naturally.
without medical intervention, just in nature, 30 to 50%. What this means for the law is that if you've got fetal personhood statutes, you've got every time there's a late period, menstrual period, or a heavy menstrual period, you have a potential person there. And that's going to have implications for all of law. Driver's license, the date of birth. We date it from a live birth right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have child support payments, tax deductions, voting rights. Who inherits what share of property? Every time there's a late period or a heavy period, it is potentially a human being under these ridiculous statutes. Fetal personhood is incoherent and it will not work in the law.
Okay, so let me just make sure these dots are connected. So the idea being, if that's a potential person, and now that person has some sort of rights could attach to exactly inheritance, child support, all these other things. The potential person may no longer be with us, but there's some sort of rights would attach from that. I don't want to say moment, but from that, the existence of these cells.
Exactly. This imaginary moment of fertilization or conception, child support. Let's just think about that. Every time she's late, she can claim for child support. Is this really what we want? It's ridiculous. It's incoherent. It makes no sense in religion. It makes no sense in law, and it makes chaos. In addition, we have our fundamental document, the American Constitution. And in the 14th Amendment, Section 1, Clause 1, the first sentence after the Civil War, all persons born or naturalized shall be citizens of the United States and citizens of the state wherein they reside. It defines it. It is a born person. And there are some crazy, the slaughterhouse cases and some antique cases written by, insanely out of touch men, interpreting this in weird ways. It says it right in plain language, all persons born. It takes a birth to make a person under American law. Now, your religion may have something different to say. That's fine. But under law, it has to be a live birth. So let's deal with our three myths. Number one, American law did not always ban abortions. That is not true. It's not even close to being true. At common law early on, there were no restrictions on the private sphere, the woman. And the early restrictions that we did have were to protect the woman from quacks and, charlatans. It wasn't until the 1860s that we started seeing the state laws changing in number.
And number two. Before you go up to number two, I suspect the average person would assume that abortions have either always been illegal or been restricted. That's my guess. I haven't done an anecdotal survey, but I want to stress that. So it has not been the case throughout American history. And I'm would wait in many countries. Okay.
So, and as we discussed in the science podcast, abortion potions and procedures were widely advertised in women's magazines. It was very common. There was at common law, when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, there were no statutes banning abortion.
Okay.
None. Zero. Not one.
So this is all recent.
Well, 1821, Connecticut, but it's to protect the woman from charlatans. It was never enforced against the woman. It was to protect her from snake oil salesmen. 1821 Connecticut, 1829 New York. Those are the earliest ones, and they're not to protect some imaginary, fetal person. It's to protect the woman. It's not until the 1860s, 1880s that we see the American states enact anti-abortion statutes. And even then, it wasn't prosecuting the woman. It was prosecuting the abortion provider.
What was motivating that?
Yeah. This is the key. It's not religion, and it's certainly not science or medicine. It's the doctors, the American Medical Association, which in the 1860s was still using leeches and hadn't achieved gatekeeper goal control over the medical profession. And they wanted to corner the market. They wanted to drive the midwives and other non-doctor practitioners out of business. It was economic. It was a union move by the doctors. And the doctor is Dr. Horatio Storer, Storer, Dr. Storer. And he didn't have enough clout because the AMA it was a baby little organization, didn't have any power. They were using leeches. They didn't wash their hands. And so Dr. Storer made an alliance with the white nativists, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, nativists in the post-Civil War era, who were afraid of too many immigrants. And the immigrants were primarily Roman Catholic, and they were having too many babies. And so the alliance was a nativist, white Protestant, white supremacist alliance to try to force white Protestant women to have more babies.
Okay, so the idea is immigrants are coming in, predominantly Catholic, we're generalizing, lots of babies. And so for the people who didn't like this upsetting the kind of equality apple cart, it was like, we've got to stop those other white women from having abortions, regulating their fertility, from that sort of thing.
Yeah, and let me add a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment as well.
Okay,
right?
Sure,
Anti-Catholic,
sure.
anti-Jewish. It was the Protestants, of which I grew up in the Protestant church. So this is my heritage.
Why is it that the little saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same, is going through my brain? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, the anti-immigrant sentiment was very strong, and that's how Dr. Horatio Storer, may his name live in infamy. That's how Dr. Storer got the political clout to pass. And even with his so-called success, he only got to half the states, somewhere between 20 and 30 states. Eventually, by the 1920s, had passed some kind of anti-abortion statute. It is still never used against the woman.
And so state by state, there's nothing at the federal government or the national level.
Nothing. Well, the Comstock Act, right? We've got the Comstock Act. Right. And the Comstock Act, that's another we should do a whole episode on it because they're going to use it again. 1873, it made it illegal to send or receive abortion information through the federal mails. Right. But the actual criminal statutes at the state level were not enforced against the women because lawyers, we have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Okay. So it makes it too difficult to prosecute the woman. And it wasn't the intention. It was sold as protecting women from quacks and charlatans. That's how it was marketed. And so the women were not they were trying to get
Target. Can we use Target?
It is somewhat the same in the sense that it's anti-immigrant bigotry. But it's different because this time it's anti-woman. These statutes are being directed and enforced against women having miscarriages. And that is much harsher and much worse than anything that was going on in the 1860s.
Okay, so AMA wants to control the market mainly for business purposes, get rid of all the other kind of quasi-medical people. So they start pushing it, alliance with nativists to make sure the women we want to have the babies in their sense. Okay, so this is where we are in sort of late 1860s. Is that where we've kind of gotten it?
Yeah, that's where we're at. And by 1973, when Roe versus Wade is announced by the U.S. Supreme Court, only 30 states have any kind of significant anti-abortion statutes. 20, it's not illegal everywhere, and the Supreme Court suddenly overturns that. It's about 50-50. About 20 states are allowing legal abortions in many circumstances, and then there are another 30 that are stricter. But it's not by any means, even in 1973, women are still having legal abortions prior to Roe.
So, and I don't know if you can answer this. So when Roe came in, and Roe was a compromise, and we can talk about that. So in some states, it may have opened up their restrictions. In some states, it may have made it tighter in theory. Is that accurate?
Exactly. That is
Okay.
accurate, Scott.
Okay. To have this kind of national compromise standard that Roe created.
Yeah. And Roe was clearly a compromise.
Right.
Right.
Now we're
So
back to this patchwork of states, but okay, that.
so Roe said that a woman is definitely a person under the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question that a woman is a person born and has due process rights. And I think the analogy in law and in ethics is kidney. If someone is dying and they need your kidney to stay alive, you can choose to donate your kidney, and you should, please do. But the law can't force you, can't take your body and seize your kidney or hook you up to that other person involuntarily. And that's what's going on here is the woman, her body is being seized by the state legislatures, and she's forced to make medical decisions for the benefit of somebody else, for the benefit of, and that's assuming that a fetus is a human being, which, as we know, at common law and under religion, it was not.
Right.
But even
so
assuming.
This is off target, and we didn't talk about this before, Elizabeth, but I assume you'll have thoughts. How much has because I'm thinking, okay, so what's changed? One of the major things that have changed throughout this era we're talking about is the acceptance and widespread availability of so many methods of birth control. Now women could take this into their own hands, from even the 50s and 60s to 80s, 90s, today. I mean, all of this stuff that men didn't necessarily know about that women could access independently. Thank you. They had their own money, etc. That feels like such a backdrop because I'm thinking, okay, what really did motivate all of this desire to now reverse Roe, to seize more control, to take us backward? And how do you think the whole widespread acceptance of birth control within the control of the women have played into that?
Well, women have had birth control going back to, as far as we know, ancient Greece and Turkey.
Okay.
I think what really shifted, now the methods of birth control have improved. Medical science has given us safer, more effective, and we have legalized standards for the anti-abortificants. I mean, it's better, but we've always had birth control. I think what changed is this idea of the woman's sphere. Before, we didn't talk about this with men. We didn't discuss menstrual periods with men. We didn't discuss late menstrual periods and restoring the normal flow of the menstrual period. This just wasn't something you would discuss with men, and men didn't want to discuss it.
So how did it get so that men, are now, this is our sphere to be speaking on, legislating on, all that sort of thing?
Making decisions on, right?
It is a power play that not only have some, but not all men, right? Not all men want to control other people's bodies and choices, but some men do. And in all fairness, some women think this is fine. Mm-hmm. So it's not, feminism is not gendered.
No, for sure.
True.
And attitudes on abortion and birth control and reproductive freedom and forced childbirth are not gendered.
Right. But I guess the whole anti-abortion sanctity of life movement and the growth of that. And as you say, and the growth of this now being part of the public sphere, as opposed to, which came along, of course, with women's greater economic independence and freedoms and all that kind of thing. And then now it became something that everyone else had opinion on how others did it. I guess that's what I'm sort of
It's a
mulling over.
wonderful marketing campaign. If you understand, and here I want to make a comment about both pro-choice and anti-choice campaigns. This is a good fundraiser.
For sure.
It's a very important, and just like the doctors in the 1860s, if you stop looking at it as propaganda or religion or imaginary moments, and you start following the money, you will see that both pro-choice and anti-choice people are raising lots of political money off of this issue. And I know you don't expect me to say that, but that is my opinion.
I agree. And all of these things have become marketing tools. There's no question,
They're
even
marketing
if there's
tools.
a legitimate issue underneath it, they become juggernauts with their own life almost, to mix metaphors on life.
Yeah.
Well, and something I just wanted to throw in before we left this topic is not only is there the family planning aspect, access to birth control, but then there's the removal of sex education in classrooms. And so not only, do you not have, we don't want to talk about the realities of what happens with an unexpected pregnancy, but we're not going to do any education on how to prevent, how to have safe sex, all of those things, that it's just a continuation of the catch-22s that we seem to be faced with time and time again.
Yeah.
Well said.
Before, I hope we have time, Ashley. And Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you something that I had in my notes and see if there's something that, if you have thoughts on the Webster case. And I guess it stands out because it relied on all of these misconceptions, if I understand it correctly, that the misconceptions you've talked about, that gendered language that we've talked about before, about fertilization and the moment and all that sort of thing, were all embedded into this, I hate to use the word seminal legal decision, but this important legal decision. Am I getting that wrong?
Good play on words, Scott. 10 points.
Yeah. Well, I think Roe and Webster focus on the concept of viability of the fetus.
Okay.
So this goes back to the analogy about using somebody else's kidney. Because a lot of people can't imagine an unwanted pregnancy, but they can't imagine that they've got two kidneys, they really only need one, and maybe somebody would want that kidney.
Wait a minute, people can't imagine an unwanted pregnancy? Who are these people?
Men.
Imagine.
Not all men. Not all men. There are a lot of men who are faced with child support payments that are a bit of a surprise. But so it's the unwanted kidney thing. So if the unborn fetus baby person can exist on their own without using the body of the woman against her will, then we call that viability. The fetus is viable. It can sustain, it can be born alive,
right,
which is what the Constitution requires and what American and British common law have required. A live birth. And if the fetus can be born alive, then it's a person. Then it has due process rights. It's a citizen if it's born in the United States. I mean, right? Sure. So it focuses on when the fetus baby can be alive once it's no longer using the woman's body, once it's no longer attached to her kidneys, right?
Well, that makes me think also that our advances in keeping alive very early term births have changed people's notions of this, which are admittedly amazing scientific improvements. We can now keep alive. It just pushed that back. I mean, there was no such thing a couple of generations ago. And now we have these very, very early births, which through amazing cost and effort and money and science are kept alive. I have to imagine that's changed people's notion about these fetuses.
Yeah. And clearly the advances in neonatal medical technology
Thank you.
with
That's what
premature babies.
Mhm.
Would you like me to tell my own story, or you want me to stay at the legal level?
How is our time, Ashley? I am concerned about that.
So we've got about 5 minutes. So I will defer because, I think that your story is interesting. And then we want to make sure we get to our wrap up though.
So the last point, the legal point,
Yeah.
is
Yes.
the constitutional point.
Yes.
And this is where people get really mixed up. They get down in the weeds. Are we going to allow abortions at 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 15 weeks? And is it rape? But is it real rape? But is it incest? But was it really incest? They were only second cousins. And people are micromanaging. They're down in the weeds and they're trying to be, the God, judge, and jury of every pregnancy. And every pregnancy is different, right? Half of them don't make it anyway, but so legally, constitutionally, people are at the wrong level. They're asking the wrong question. It's not what the abortion law should be. It's who. And that's the constitutional point. Who decides? We've got options. We can have state legislatures decide. Don't you just love politicians? Let's let them decide.
And I want you to continue.
Judges could decide.
That's why the misconceptions drive me insane, because state legislatures, who, regardless of their politics, they probably are not experts in this, and they're just taking some
You think?
wisdom and
They're
making these decisions.
raising money for their next campaign.
Yeah.
They're corrupt.
Yeah.
They're raising money for their next campaign. And so they're grandstanding on everybody loves babies, right? That's what they're grandstanding on. So it's who decides.